Due to the nature of my day job as an infantry officer in the Army, I've had to spend a lot of time just standing in the rain. Let it be known, I'm not particularly fond of standing outside in the rain, especially for prolonged periods that result in every square inch of my clothing looking like it just jumped into a pool. Now, the tricky part with wet clothes is, of course, how to eventually get them dry again so you're not just some damp and miserable being walking around. And this is especially important when you're in a field environment and you can't just take your clothes off, throw them in the dryer, and wait a couple minutes, and then bam, it's as if they were never wet to begin with. I feel like the process of trying to get your clothes dry in the field after it's been raining or while it's raining is one of those things that people just overly complicate and just make things worse for themselves. A lot of the times I've seen people just constantly changing into dry clothes only for it to rain 5 minutes later, and then by the end of the day you have 3 sets of wet uniforms rather than just the one you started off with. You also have some people who, given the chance, will take off parts of their uniform to let them air dry or something like that, but 9 times out of 10 that only makes your clothes 5% less damp than you started with, and then you get to go through the horribly uncomfortable process of just putting on wet clothes again. The unfortunate reality that I've come to conclude with is that the best way to dry off your wet clothes after they've gotten wet while you're wearing them is to just keep wearing them, relying on your body heat and movement to kind of speed up the evaporation process. Although that does mean you're just kind of trotting around in wet pants for however long it takes for it to dry out, depending on how cooperative the sun tends to be at that moment. It probably goes without saying that wearing wet pants and boots and socks for prolonged days makes you think about all the things you'd rather be doing than wearing those boots and socks for prolonged days while they're wet. And you have to start to mentally cope with the fact that you're just physically uncomfortable for seemingly no reason for that amount of time. Like, surely all this physical discomfort has some place in a higher scheme or greater purpose or something like that. Surely it's not just for nothing, right? Surely you're not just standing outside the rain for no good reason, because that would be dumb. Although I've noticed the more I try to rationalize and cope with this kind of thing, it starts to parallel the people who are constantly fighting to get dry, just making themselves worse off. Now, sure, there are some easy grabs to justify that it's not necessarily always a bad thing to just be standing out and be somewhat physically miserable for a while. It helps you appreciate the small comforts in life, like a nice shower or a warm bed. It is physiologically good for your body to learn to adapt to different environments, whether that be the heat, the cold, the wet, whatever it may be. It builds mental toughness if you're physically uncomfortable for that amount of time, obviously. But here's the thing, you can only gain so much from that. Eventually you will hit diminishing returns, and eventually you increasing in mental toughness just transitions at some point to you just standing out in the rain for no reason. At some point you're building grit, and then 30 seconds later you're just doing the prone row in wet grass for some reason. And I honestly feel like I've been at that point where there are no more lessons that standing out in the rain can teach me. At this point I'm just wet, just kind of damp and miserable. So now I just kind of have to stand there in a wet uniform while trying to do mental gymnastics to justify the actions that have led me to being out in the rain, while most of the people I graduated high school with are still in bed because it's 6 in the morning, and I just stepped in a giant puddle because the sun hasn't risen yet and I wasn't able to see it while running. It makes me just think about the totality of all the things I've had to do that I don't necessarily enjoy doing, whether they be for some good reason or for no reason at all, apparently. It makes me think if I've just wasted my time here on Earth just being objectively miserable when I could have just not been doing other things. Or are there any legitimate lessons I can pull out of being physically miserable at this point that would kind of legitimize the whole process? But maybe in the end, like when it rains, it's just better for me to wear the wet pants for a while. Just accept that parts of my life are just going to be physically uncomfortable, and that's okay. Don't fight it too much, and just use that as an opportunity to appreciate having drier clothes when I do get them. At least appreciate them more than I would have otherwise. On that note, I'm gonna go dry off those pants that I used for a visual metaphor earlier.